You are a cybersecurity architect in your company, and your leadership comes and asks you to provide a guidance on managing cybersecurity risk. There are many frameworks that can give guidance on cybersecurity risk, especially managing risk around cybersecurity. And one such framework is NIST CSF, Cybersecurity Framework, and that's the topic of this presentation. Before we get started, the disclaimer first. This is for information purpose only, and opinion expressed are mine and my interpretation of the topic. First, let's see what NIST stands for. It's an acronym which stands National Institute of Standards and Technology, founded early part of 19th century. Its main mission is to promote innovation and competitiveness among industry, especially advanced manufacturing and advanced health. Today, NIST is responsible for many things, including measurement science, standards, and technology that promotes not only innovation and competitiveness, but also safety and collaboration among industry and the government. This NIST cybersecurity framework started in 2013 as an executive order signed by then President Barack Obama. It states it's a policy of the United States to enhance the security and resilience of a nation's critical infrastructure. What does nation's critical infrastructure mean? Any infrastructure that provides basic necessities such as electricity, utilities, water supply to the citizen, and the health to the citizen, or the natural infrastructure, or the critical national critical infrastructure. And this executive order focuses on efficiency and innovation on these sectors, on these infrastructure, and also promotes safety and security of the infrastructure. 4 months down the line, in July 2013, the first draft was released, and then a series of workshops is conducted by NIST, including various small business and large corporations. And the first version 1.0 released around 2014, February of 2014. And this is a living document, which means any feedback given by the implementers is being incorporated into the document, and then the NIST updates the document now and then. And the next release of the document, version 1.1, was released in 2018. That incorporates a lot of feedback from companies who were trying to implement the security framework within their organization. Earlier, I said there are many frameworks that you can look into for these kinds of requests, especially managing cybersecurity risk. And there are many frameworks, and these are the top 6 frameworks, which is 2 from NIST, CSF, and 853. 853 is mostly around security controls. CSF is a comprehensive framework which encompasses 853 if you want to. And you have ISO 27001 and 2. CAS Top 20, that's very targeted specific controls. If you want to quickly get started, CAS Top 20 it's a beautiful framework to get started. PCI DSS, it's a payment card industry standards. If you have a payment solution that you run within your data center or within your cloud infrastructure, then you should be compliant with PCI DSS and COBIT. COBIT can do many things, and it can do cybersecurity framework as well. And so now you have these many frameworks. So how do you pick and choose framework that's very important for your company? Right? What is the selection criteria? Usually the market revolves around 2 main selection criteria. Number 1 is, what is your organization goal and what is the organization compliance requirements are. If your organization compliance requirement that includes regulatory compliance such as HIPAA, PCI, and contractual compliance. Suppose you are contracting a federal government agency and you're part of the supply chain, federal government infrastructure supply chain, or federal government information system supply chain. Then you have a specific set of requirements that you have adhered to as a part of the supply chain, and that drives a requirement. Say if you do a contracting work with the federal government, then you have to follow NIST CSF and or 853. Then other selection criteria is how many controls, how extensive the controls coverage comes out of the box from these frameworks, right? This is very critical piece as well. And NIST 853 has a wide coverage in terms of number of security controls across the cybersecurity areas. PCI is very targeted, and NIST CSF has a good coverage, but not as extensive as 853. But as I was saying earlier, NIST 853 can be incorporated into NIST CSF framework, and the mapping has been provided by NIST CSF itself. So it's a nice framework where you can plug in different other frameworks into the framework itself. Like if you follow COBIT framework for security controls, then you have provision to include some of the COBIT controls into the NIST cybersecurity framework itself. We can talk about all those things later in the presentation. So based on these two consideration, these are the two selection criteria where you pick and choose what cybersecurity framework to use. Now, getting deeper into cybersecurity components, cybersecurity framework has three main components: core, profile, and implementation tiers. So core, as it stands for, that provides a set of activities, and each activity has an outcome, and it has a reference to other security controls framework which you talked about earlier, like CIS top 20, COBIT, or ISO 27001-2, or if you plan to use NIST 853 controls. So those mapping is available. So it's nothing but a set of activities that you do to improve your cybersecurity posture. The best example is, say, if you want to have an authentication controls. Now there are many ways to provide authentication controls. So you can choose one mechanism, one standard from authentication control, and you can provide all the subcategories and all the controls belong to the authentication control, and that can be mapped into protect function of the core framework, which we'll talk about later. Tiers. Tiers or implementation tiers. Think this of a lens through which you view your cybersecurity risk and processes that are put in place to manage this risk. Right? Say, for example, you have a robust threat intelligence process, meaning that you gather threat intelligence from outside resources, and then at the same time you also contribute threat intelligence to the external partners, to the external industries, so that you collaborate the threat intelligence from internal to external and external to internal. So that's one cybersecurity process around threat intelligence. So how that threat intelligence process is modeled around. So this implementation tiers provide a framework. You can see this as a capability maturity model, where you have different levels of capability maturity model, and similarly you have different tiers implementation, where you can pick and choose the process that you want to implement, and based on that implementation you fall into one of the tiers, which we'll talk about those things later. And the profile is nothing but the state. It's a snapshot of your organization. What's your organization currently from the cybersecurity risk management standpoint? Where do you stand? It's just a snapshot, and based on the snapshot you can develop a roadmap to have a future state. So this profile helps in the implementation and the roadmap from as is cybersecurity risk to be cybersecurity risk profile, which we'll talk about later. These are the three main components of cybersecurity framework. Diving into the core functions of the framework, NIST has 5 core functions: identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. Identify identifies your critical infrastructure assets. Protect provides a set of guidelines to protect those critical services. uh, detect provides a set of defines a set of activities that helps to identify a cybersecurity event. This mainly revolves around logging, anomalies detection, and the respond is what happens when there is an incident and how do you respond, how do you communicate to the internal and external stakeholders, how do you mitigate the threat. And the last one is recovery. Once the threat is mitigated, what's your plan to bring back all the systems, bring back the capabilities that were affected by this incident. So these are the 5 main areas around cybersecurity, and the organization maturity depends on how good are you in these 5 areas. The best approach is, when you start your cybersecurity risk program, when you want to manage your cybersecurity risk, make sure that you divide your attention, all equal attention in all 5 areas. All the 5 areas are equally important. For example, first you have to identify your crown jewels. First you have to identify what's your business requirement is, what's your business actual goal is, and what they covered the most. Say if your business says that if they want to have a 99.99% uptime, then that's very critical piece of information that you need, that to make sure that when you respond and recover, you respond and recover in that fashion, right? So those security controls will take higher priorities. Business goal is very important, and identifying crown jewel is very important, so that once you have those crown jewels, you can protect those jewels. You can apply necessary safeguards around jewels, like network segmentation, multi-factor authentication, and you can make sure that you have the SIM system that's plugged into those for detection capabilities. And once you identify any anomalies through through orchestration on the SIM system, you can respond effectively, and you can communicate to the third parties and your stakeholders and recover those crown jewels, right? These are the core functions, and these core functions can be implemented in many different ways. As I was saying earlier, you can use NIST 853 security control list, and then you can use that list to implement the security controls, which is nothing but a safeguards. You can implement the safeguards and map that back to CSF, or you can use COBIT or ISO 27001-2 and implement those controls and then map it back to CSF. In that regard, CSF is very flexible when it comes to security controls. These are the core categories that you can see. As you see, there are 5 main functions, and each function has many different categories, and each category has different subcategories. Say for example, let's talk about this particular one. Say we have a protect function, and the protect function has awareness and training, which is PRAT, as the name suggests, protect, awareness and training. And if you drill down protect, awareness and training, if you go to the cybersecurity document, you can see various subcategories underneath that you should have these many training. The training should be conducted in following format, and you should have and there will be so many subcategories, and each subcategories will be mapped against other framework categories, such as 853, revision 4.5, ISO, and COBIT. So if you choose to implement, say for example, NIST 853, you can implement certain controls and then map those controls back to cybersecurity framework, so that so that the leadership will have one dashboard, one panel, which is through cybersecurity framework. They see your entire cybersecurity program, risk management, through this one framework. And that's the whole point of having a framework, which is to provide a visibility of how the current uh, infrastructure looks like from cybersecurity standpoint. And also, if you want to move the needle, move to the another posture of cybersecurity risk management, how do you move from as is to be? What are what's the roadmap is going to look like, and what's a gap analysis? You can do a gap analysis, and then you can move the needle from one posture to another posture. And say for example, now your leaderships comes and ask you to improve your data security. So here data security falls under protect. So you can have various encryption mechanism, you can have data classification, evaluation, and then based on the data classification, you have to encrypt the data, decrypt the data, make sure that all the necessary systems are in place. So each will have a subcategory. And if you want to increase your posture on data security, all you have to do is go to the data security and address those controls, and your cybersecurity posture on data security protect will go up. And that's how you move the needle from one profile to another profile. The next is the implementation tier. As I was saying earlier, implementation tier, this is just for reference only, but think this as some cyber capability maturity model. and you have different capability maturity model 1 to 5 based on your maturity level. You can start with ad hoc and go all the way to continuous process improvement, and similarly here it has different tiers. So what it tells you is, if it tells you where is your organization from implementation standpoint, especially on the processes and the cybersecurity risk view, right? So say for example in this case a tier 1 partial, which essentially means that there is no process put in place. It's everything is ad hoc. Everything is ad hoc. It's very reactive, and whenever something goes wrong, it's individual brilliance, and the person comes and makes sure that all the necessary things gets done to mitigate those incident or event that happened during the time, right? So that's a tier 1. It's nothing in place. There is no risk management. There is no standards and policies. These are not communicated to the rest of the organization, and there is no whatsoever external participation with the external industry. And imagine adaptive tier 4 implementation is you have all your policies, standards in place, and it's been communicated to the rest of an organization, and every project adheres to your policies, and you learn as and when an incident happens, and then that learning is fed back to the policies and then fed back to the project team, and then they make sure that that event never occurred after the fact, after implementation of those new controls. The cybersecurity risk program is closely tied up to the overall corporation or your company risk program, and you have a very good external participation. You meaning that you talk to the external third parties, external industry. You get the threat intelligence, and then at the same time you feed your threat intelligence back to the external vendors, external industry vendors. So you tier 4 is you are a leader and you act as a leader. And tier 4 is tier 1 is you just starting your cybersecurity program. It's everything is ad hoc. You just try to manage, and then you try to move from tier 1 to tier 2 and tier 3. And those are the processes around those. So your processes determines which tier you are in. And the last one is a profile. The profile is a snapshot where you are. So you have a business objective. You know your business goal, and what's your business objective. Say your business objective is continuous uptime, and you handle critical data, which means that the data has to be protected at all cost. If not, you will have a lot of regulatory fines, statutory fines. That's your business objective. And you have a threat environment, and you have implemented certain controls. So those three things give you a profile. It will tell you that, hey, this is your business requirement, and you have a very high criteria on protect and respond and recover. Because you handle a critical data, so you have to identify the critical data, protect it, detect it when any event happens, respond it, and recover. And this is the state where you are in. That gives you a snapshot of your cybersecurity program. And if you want to move the needle, if you want to have a better protection based on your cybersecurity posture, if you want to improve your posture, you say, okay, this is my current profile. I want to have a target profile of these much things. Now come up with a roadmap of where you are, where you want to be. Do the gap analysis, identify all the controls and the processes that goes with the controls, because control by itself, it's not very effective. Control has to be validated, the efficacy of the control has to be tested, and then there should be process around the control on what needs to be done when those things get violated. Those things should be put in place, and you can develop your roadmap which can helps you to move the needle. So this cybersecurity framework on the whole, it gives you a holistic picture of your cybersecurity program, the risk management program in your company. And it has many ways. It can provide a complete dashboard, if you will, to see where your cybersecurity posture is and where you want to move the needle, or if and also it can give you the very good view, holistic top level view of all the security controls that you put in place, so that you can communicate effectively to the regulators or to your contracting companies. If you're part of the federal supply chain, you can check these documents, the profiles, implementation terms, security controls that NIST CSF provides. You can package it, and then you can tell them that, hey, we are not the weakest link in the supply chain, and and NIST is one of the essential criteria if you want to be part of the federal government contracting program. If you want to be a federal government supply chain, you pretty much have to follow the NIST framework. Hope you find this helpful. Have a good one.